I'm feeding my fish when, boom, my family's 50-year-old bridge explodes like a blockbuster movie. One moment I'm tossing trout food, the next I'm flying backwards like an unpaid stunt double. And guess what? The local HOA calls it a structural issue. Sure, if structural issue means someone used enough explosives to open a bank vault. Enter Gwen, the HOA president with the charm of a wet traffic cone and a personal vendetta against logic. Now she's spinning stories faster than a raccoon in a laundry machine, and somehow I'm the villain? If your HOA has ever pulled something this ridiculous, drop a comment. I need to know I'm not alone in this suburban soap opera. Trust me, this story gets messier than a town hall meeting with free wine. I'm feeding my fish when, boom, my family's 50-year-old bridge explodes like a blockbuster movie. Who's behind it? Gwen from the HOA with her fake smile and a dirty plan. But she doesn't know I'm about to dry up her whole neighborhood. Where are you watching from? Drop a comment below. Picture this. You're standing by a peaceful lake that's been in your family for 3 generations, watching the morning mist rise off the water while you scatter fish food across the surface. The wooden bridge your grandfather built in 1972 stretches across the narrow inlet, connecting your property to the main trail. It's Tuesday morning, 7:30 a.m., and I'm doing what I've done every day for the past 5 years, since I inherited this place, taking care of the organic fish farm that's become my livelihood. The explosion comes without warning. One second I'm watching rainbow trout surface for their breakfast, and the next the world erupts in a thunderous roar that sends every bird within a mile screaming into the sky. The blast knocks me backward onto the muddy bank, fish food scattering everywhere as I hit the ground hard. My ears are ringing like church bells, and when I finally manage to sit up, I see what used to be my grandfather's beautiful handcrafted bridge, now floating in chunks across the lake's surface. 50 years of family history, reduced to splinters and twisted metal brackets in less than 3 seconds. The smell of sulfur and burnt wood fills the air as I struggle to process what just happened. My name is Dale Morgan, and I run Morgan's Organic Aquaculture from this 20-acre property that borders the Willowbrook Heights subdivision. What started as my grandfather's weekend fishing spot has evolved into a sustainable fish farming operation that supplies organic trout and bass to restaurants across 3 counties. The lake isn't just my business, it's my home, my heritage, and according to water rights documents I inherited, it's also the primary source of the underground aquifer that feeds the entire neighborhood. Most residents don't know that last part yet, but they're about to learn it the hard way. As I stand staring at the floating remains, my hands shake with shock and rage, and one name echoes in my head: Gwen Lacey. Gwen moved into the neighborhood 8 months ago and immediately got herself elected as HOA president, promising to bring order and property values to our suburban corner. She's a sharp-faced woman in her late 30s with perfectly styled blonde hair and the kind of smile that never reaches her eyes. I first met her 3 weeks after she moved in, when she showed up at my property with a clipboard and an attitude, demanding to know why I hadn't registered my commercial enterprise with the HOA. When I explained that my property predates the subdivision by 40 years and isn't subject to HOA regulations, her smile got tighter and her voice sharper. She spent 20 minutes lecturing me about community standards before leaving with a promise that we'd talk again soon. Now, as I wade into the shallow water to examine the bridge debris, I'm finding evidence that makes my blood run cold. The wooden planks aren't just broken, they're shattered in a pattern that screams controlled demolition. I pick up a piece of the central support beam and my suspicions are confirmed when I see telltale scorch marks and chemical residue that can only come from commercial-grade explosives. This wasn't an accident or structural failure. Someone deliberately destroyed my bridge with enough dynamite to level a small building. My grandfather built this bridge, using techniques he learned as a Navy Seabee, designed to last a century. The fact that it's now floating in pieces tells me exactly how much explosive force was used, and more importantly, that whoever did this had access to professional demolition equipment. I'm still standing waist-deep in the lake when my neighbor Simon Moore comes running down the trail from his auto repair shop. Simon's been my closest friend since I moved back here 5 years ago, a stocky guy with grease-stained hands and loyalty that runs deeper than the lake itself. He stops short when he sees the destruction, his mouth hanging open. "Holy hell, Dale, what happened here?" It sounded like a war zone from my shop. I wade back to shore, still clutching the scorched piece of wood, and look him straight in the eye. "Someone blew up my bridge, Simon. And I've got a pretty good idea who." His expression shifts from shock to anger as the implications hit him. "You thinking what I'm thinking?" I nod grimly. Gwen Lacey just made the biggest mistake of her life. Simon and I spend the next hour collecting evidence from the blast site. We find metal fragments that look suspiciously like commercial blasting caps, chemical residue that smells like industrial-grade explosive compound, and most damning of all, fresh tire tracks leading from the main road to a spot about 50 yards from where the bridge used to stand. The tracks are from a heavy truck, the kind used by construction and demolition crews. I take photos of everything with my phone, making sure to capture the evidence from multiple angles. This isn't just vandalism or a prank gone wrong. This is a calculated attack on my property and my livelihood, and whoever planned it knew exactly what they were doing. The bridge wasn't just convenience. It was the only practical way to transport fish from my breeding ponds to the loading area. By 10 a.m., I've called my insurance company, the county sheriff's office, and a forensic specialist who owes me a favor from college. Deputy Martinez arrives first, a no-nonsense woman in her 40s who's handled everything from cattle rustling to explosions in our rural county. She takes one look at the blast pattern and whistles low. "Someone really wanted your bridge gone, Mr. Morgan. This level of destruction doesn't happen by accident." She spends 40 minutes documenting the scene, taking measurements and collecting samples. When she's finished, she gives me a look that's equal parts sympathy and determination. "I'll run these samples through the state lab, but between you and me, this has professional written all over it. You got any enemies with access to commercial explosives?" The forensic specialist arrives just as Deputy Martinez finishes her report. He takes one sniff of the blast site and confirms my worst fears. "This is military-grade commercial explosive, probably C4 or something similar. Whoever did this knew exactly how much to use and where to place it for maximum structural damage. This wasn't someone playing with fireworks. This was a professional demolition job." He collects samples of the residue and promises to have a full analysis within 48 hours. As he's packing up his equipment, he gives me advice that chills me to the bone. "Dale, whoever did this went to a lot of trouble to make sure your bridge was completely destroyed. This feels personal." As the afternoon sun beats down on the floating wreckage, I find myself standing alone at the water's edge, my mind racing and my hands clenched into fists. The financial impact is immediate and devastating. Without the bridge, I can't get feed trucks to the far ponds, and I can't transport my fish to the loading area. My weekly deliveries to restaurants will have to be canceled, and my breeding program will be severely disrupted, but the emotional impact cuts even deeper. This bridge was my grandfather's legacy, a symbol of our family's connection to this land that goes back 3 generations. Whoever destroyed it didn't just attack my business, they attacked my family's history and my very identity. By evening, I've made a decision that will change everything. I'm not going to report my suspicions to the police yet. I want concrete proof, and I want Gwen to incriminate herself so thoroughly that there's no possibility of escape. I spend the evening setting up trail cameras around my property, positioning them to cover every possible approach. If Gwen or her accomplices come back, I'll have video evidence that will hold up in any court. 3 days after the bridge explosion, Gwen makes her next move with surgical precision. I'm checking my trail cameras when Simon comes jogging over from his shop, waving an official-looking envelope with the HOA letterhead. His face is flushed with anger as he hands it to me. "Dale, you need to see this garbage. Gwen had her secretary deliver it to every house in the neighborhood." I tear open the envelope and read the letter that makes my blood pressure spike. The letter informs the valued residents of Willowbrook Heights that my property represents a potential environmental hazard and property value concern due to my failure to maintain safe infrastructure. But the line that makes my stomach flip is this: runoff from fish waste may be contaminating the neighborhood's water supply. That's pure fiction wrapped in faux concern, designed to terrify people who don't understand the first thing about aquaculture. The letter is a masterpiece of manipulation, carefully worded to make me look like an irresponsible property owner while painting Gwen as a concerned community leader protecting everyone's investments. Every line is designed to plant seeds of doubt and fear in my neighbors' minds, turning them against me while positioning herself as their protector. The most infuriating part is her offer to mediate a fair resolution that would involve me transitioning the property to more appropriate residential use. In other words, selling out to developers so she can claim credit for improving the neighborhood. It's corporate speak for highway robbery, and she's betting that my neighbors are too naive to see through her scheme. Over the next 2 days, I start noticing the cold shoulders and suspicious glances from neighbors who used to wave when they drove past my property. A longtime customer cancels her fish orders without explanation. A young couple who used to bring their kids to see the fish suddenly find excuses to avoid eye contact when they jog past on the trail. It's like watching slow mash into strangers and allies into enemies. Gwen's strategy is working exactly as she planned. She's making me into a pariah in my own neighborhood. The isolation stings, but it also fuels my determination to expose her for what she really is, a manipulative predator who destroys lives to build her own power. Simon refuses to be swayed by Gwen's propaganda campaign. In fact, he's been doing detective work that's uncovered information making Gwen's attacks even more sinister. Dale, I've been talking to Marjorie Grant, the retired postal worker who lives on Oak Street. She's got some serious dirt on our HOA president. Marjorie, it turns out, has been keeping meticulous records of HOA finances and board meetings, and what she's discovered would make a forensic accountant weep. According to Marjorie's documents, Gwen has been systematically embezzling money from the HOA's reserve fund, using fake invoices and inflated contractor bills to funnel thousands of dollars into accounts controlled by her shell company. The financial fraud explains Gwen's desperation to get control of my property. My lake and surrounding land represent a prime development opportunity worth easily $2 million if rezoned for residential use. Meanwhile, Rick Devers has been earning his place as Gwen's #1 accomplice by spreading even more vicious rumors about my supposed environmental violations. I overhear him at the gas station, telling anyone who'll listen that my fish farm is a health hazard and that he's heard from reliable sources that I've been dumping chemicals into the lake. The man has no shame. He's literally making up stories about pollution while standing 50 feet from his own property, where his untreated septic system has been leaking into the groundwater for years. But Rick's lies are gaining traction with people who don't know enough about aquaculture to separate fact from fiction, and I can see doubt growing in their eyes every time I encounter them in town. Marjorie Grant proves to be an unexpected ally in this war of misinformation. She shows up at my property Thursday evening with a manila folder full of documents and steely determination that reminds me why postal workers have such a reputation for getting things done. Mr. Morgan, I've been watching Gwen Lacey operate for 8 months now, and I've seen her kind before. She's a predator who feeds on people's fears and insecurities to build her own power base. But she's also sloppy and arrogant, which means she's made mistakes we can use against her. Marjorie spreads the documents across my kitchen table, showing me a paper trail of financial irregularities, backdated invoices and suspicious payments that paint a picture of systematic corruption within the HOA. The smoking gun in Marjorie's collection is a series of email printouts between Gwen and Rick discussing property acquisition strategies and community improvement initiatives that clearly refer to forcing me off my land. In one particularly damning exchange, Rick writes about creating pressure points to make me see reason about relocating, while Gwen responds with enthusiasm about accelerating the timeline for neighborhood enhancement. Reading these emails feels like getting a glimpse into the minds of cartoon villains. They're so blatantly scheming and manipulative that it would be funny if it weren't happening to me. The emails also reference a consulting fee that Rick will receive for facilitating property transitions, confirming my suspicion that he's getting paid to help destroy my life. Armed with this new information, I decide to go on the offensive with a strategy that will force Gwen to show her true colors while gathering more evidence of her criminal behavior. I draft a formal letter to the HOA board demanding a full accounting of the organization's finances and requesting copies of all contracts and invoices from the past year. I also demand that Gwen provide documentation for her claims about environmental violations on my property, knowing full well that she can't produce evidence for something that doesn't exist. The letter is polite but firm, written in legal language that makes it clear I'm not some naive country boy who can be intimidated by corporate bullying tactics. I hand-deliver copies of the letter to every board member's house, making sure to arrive during evening hours when neighbors are likely to be home and watching. The psychological impact is immediate and satisfying. I can see curtains twitching and phones buzzing as word spreads through the neighborhood that I'm fighting back against Gwen's accusations. By making my response public and formal, I'm forcing the community to choose sides, while putting Gwen in the position of having to either produce evidence she doesn't have or admit that her claims were fabricated. It's a chess move that should flush out her next attack while giving me more ammunition for the eventual counterattack. The trail cameras I installed are already paying dividends, capturing footage that confirms my suspicions about ongoing surveillance and harassment, including Rick driving past my property multiple times at night and Gwen herself taking photographs of my facilities from the public trail. The opportunity to turn Rick Devers into my unwitting informant comes Saturday afternoon when I spot him lurking around the remains of my bridge with a measuring tape and camera. Instead of confronting him directly, I decide to play a game that will give me exactly the evidence I need to expose Gwen's entire operation. I approach him with a friendly smile and a six-pack of cold beer, playing the role of a defeated property owner who's ready to throw in the towel. "Hey Rick, hot day for surveying, isn't it? Want a beer while you're working?" His eyes light up with the predatory gleam of a salesman who thinks he's found an easy mark, and he accepts the beer with enthusiasm that tells me he's already planning his victory speech. We sit on my back porch overlooking the lake, and I let Rick do most of the talking while I nod and make sympathetic noises about how difficult the whole situation has become. I mention that the insurance company is giving me grief about rebuilding the bridge, and that maybe it's time to consider my options for moving forward. Rick practically salivates as he launches into a prepared pitch about how selling to developers would be the smart financial move and how Gwen has connections with serious buyers who could make me an offer I couldn't refuse. The man is so excited about his potential commission that he doesn't notice me discreetly activating the voice recorder app on my phone, positioned just out of sight behind the beer bottles. After his third beer, Rick's natural arrogance and stupidity combine into a perfect storm of self-incrimination. He starts bragging about how he helped solve the bridge problem and how Gwen really knows how to get things done when people won't listen to reason. When I play dumb and ask what he means, he grins like an idiot and explains how he knows a guy who specializes in controlled demolitions and how they made sure that old bridge wouldn't be a safety hazard anymore. The man literally confesses to conspiracy and destruction of property while drinking my beer on my own property, apparently believing that I'm too stupid or defeated to do anything with the information. His confession includes details about how much Gwen paid his demolition guy friend and how they chose the timing to minimize witnesses while maximizing psychological impact. The conversation gets even better when Rick starts complaining about how much Gwen paid his contractor friend for the bridge job. $2,000 for a simple demo job? Highway robbery, if you ask me. But Gwen insisted on using military-grade explosives to make sure the job was done right the first time. But Rick's biggest mistake comes when he tries to pressure me into making a quick decision about selling. He pulls out his phone and shows me photos of the bridge taken before the explosion. Rick proudly showed me photos, time-stamped, of the bridge's core supports. It was chilling. Every weak point Gwen had mapped was marked in red like a murder diagram. The photos are time-stamped from 2 weeks before the explosion, proving premeditation and careful planning. Rick is so busy trying to impress me with Gwen's thoroughness that he doesn't realize he's just provided ironclad evidence of criminal conspiracy. As Rick stumbles back to his car, thoroughly convinced that he's closed the deal of the century, I immediately make copies of the recording and photos, uploading them to multiple cloud storage accounts before calling Marjorie Grant with the good news. Her reaction is everything I hoped for, pure joy mixed with bloodthirsty desire for justice. "Oh, Mr. Morgan, this is beautiful. With this evidence and the financial documents I've compiled, we can destroy Gwen's credibility completely. But I suggest we use this strategically. Let's give her enough rope to hang herself publicly before we spring the trap. Marjorie's plan is elegantly simple. We'll use Rick's confession to force a special HOA meeting, where Gwen will have to defend herself in front of the entire community. The next phase of my plan involves creating financial pressure that will force Gwen to make desperate moves while her allies abandon ship. I prepare a detailed estimate for bridge reconstruction that totals $50,000, a figure that's completely accurate given the specialized engineering required to rebuild a structure over water with the same specifications as my grandfather's original design. I submit this estimate to the HOA along with a formal demand that they cover the costs, since their president was directly responsible for the destruction. The letter is carefully worded to make it clear that I have evidence of HOA involvement while avoiding specific accusations that could trigger a defamation lawsuit. The community reaction to my demand letter is immediate and volcanic. Within hours of delivering it to board members, my phone starts ringing with calls from neighbors who are suddenly very interested in learning more about what actually happened to my bridge. The $50,000 figure has a way of focusing people's attention, especially when they realize that the money would have to come from HOA dues and special assessments. By Tuesday evening, there's a growing coalition of homeowners demanding answers about how their organization became involved in property destruction and whether their dues are being used to fund criminal activities. Marjorie orchestrates the community uprising with the skill of a seasoned political operative, making strategic phone calls and sharing carefully selected documents that paint a picture of corruption without revealing our full hand. Gwen's response to the mounting pressure is exactly what I hoped for. Pure panic disguised as indignant authority. She shows up at my property Wednesday evening with Rick in tow, clearly intending to intimidate me into withdrawing my demand for compensation. Her perfectly styled hair is slightly disheveled, and her usually immaculate makeup can't quite hide the stress lines around her eyes. "Mr. Morgan, this ridiculous claim about HOA responsibility for your bridge is completely unfounded and potentially libelous. I'm here to give you one final opportunity to withdraw this frivolous demand before we're forced to take legal action." The woman is so rattled that she doesn't notice Rick nervously fidgeting behind her, clearly worried about what I might have recorded during our beer-fueled conversation. I respond with the calm confidence of someone holding a royal flush in a poker game, where everyone else is bluffing. Thursday evening arrives with the electricity of a championship boxing match, and the community center fills with more residents than have attended an HOA meeting in the organization's 15-year history. People are standing along the walls and spilling into the hallway, all buzzing with anticipation about what promises to be the most dramatic meeting in neighborhood history. Gwen sits at the head table looking like a defendant waiting for a death sentence, while Rick hunches in his chair like a man who suddenly realized that his mouth has written checks his body can't cash. When Marjorie takes the floor with the bearing of a prosecutor presenting evidence to a jury, she methodically lays out the financial irregularities, suspicious contractor payments, and email exchanges that prove systematic corruption. When she plays the audio recording of Rick confessing to the bridge demolition, the room erupts in gasps and angry murmurs that crescendo into outright shouting, and by the end of the meeting, both Gwen and Rick are suspended from their board positions pending a full investigation. But Gwen Lacey didn't claw her way to corporate success by accepting defeat gracefully, and her response to Thursday's humiliation proves she's willing to escalate beyond anything I could have imagined. Friday morning, I wake to a sight that makes my blood run cold. My beautiful, life-giving lake is dying before my eyes. The water level has dropped by nearly 3 feet overnight, and the normally crystal-clear surface is now a muddy, stagnant pool that reeks of dying vegetation and suffocating fish. My prize, rainbow trout, are floating belly up in the shallow areas, while the bass that took years to cultivate into breeding stock gasp desperately in water that's becoming more toxic by the hour. The cause becomes clear when I trace the shoreline and discover that someone has diverted the natural spring that feeds my lake, redirecting the water flow through hastily constructed channels that send my supply directly into the neighborhood's storm drainage system. I found a blue heron standing ankle-deep in sludge, staring at the water like it couldn't believe what it had become. Dead minnows clung to its legs. The shoreline was littered with gills, gasping for something no longer there. I waded in and pulled out a koi I hadn't seen in months, bright orange, raised by my grandfather from an imported batch. Its eyes were glazed, its mouth frozen mid-gulp. I dropped to my knees and screamed into the mud, not for the money, not for the business, but for the betrayal of something sacred. This wasn't just environmental destruction. It was desecration of everything my family had built and nurtured for 3 generations. It's an act of environmental terrorism that goes far beyond property destruction. This is an assault on a living ecosystem that took decades to establish and balance. The engineering required to pull off this diversion would have taken substantial equipment and expertise, meaning Gwen has escalated from simple demolition to full-scale ecological warfare. I spend the morning desperately trying to save what fish I can, using portable pumps to aerate the remaining water while frantically calling every environmental agency and fish rescue organization within a 100-mile radius. The scene is heartbreaking. These aren't just livestock to me, they're the culmination of 5 years of careful breeding and habitat management that represented both my livelihood and my connection to my grandfather's legacy. Watching them die in the poisoned water feels like watching my family's history being murdered, one gasping breath at a time. Simon arrives just as I'm pulling the last of the surviving fish from the toxic shallows, and his reaction to the devastation is pure rage mixed with disbelief. "Jesus Christ, Dale, she's actually trying to kill your whole operation. This isn't just harassment anymore, this is total war." He helps me transfer the surviving fish to temporary holding tanks while I explain what I've discovered about the water diversion. The spring that feeds my lake is part of the same underground aquifer system that supplies water to the entire Willowbrook Heights subdivision, and by redirecting it, Gwen has essentially weaponized the neighborhood's own water supply against me. It's a move that demonstrates both her desperation and her complete disregard for environmental consequences. But it's also a tactical error that's about to give me more power than she ever dreamed possible. The true scope of Gwen's miscalculation becomes apparent when Marjorie Grant arrives with a manila folder full of documents that will change everything. Mr. Morgan, I've been researching the water rights for this entire area, and what I've found is going to give you more power than Gwen ever dreamed possible. She spreads the documents across my kitchen table, revealing survey maps, legal filings, and water rights certificates that date back to the original land grants from the 1800s. According to these records, my property holds the primary water rights for the entire aquifer system, meaning that every drop of water used by the Willowbrook Heights subdivision is legally dependent on my continued cooperation. The water rights documentation is like discovering I've been holding a nuclear weapon without realizing it. The original surveys show that my lake sits directly on top of the main aquifer head, and the underground streams that feed it are the source of every well and water line in the neighborhood. Turns out, the developers never asked permission to tap into my aquifer. That legal oversight? My new ace of spades. Gwen's attack on my lake isn't just environmental vandalism, it's an assault on the water source that her own neighborhood depends on for survival. Armed with this knowledge, I make a decision that will turn the tables on Gwen so completely that she'll wish she'd never heard my name. I spend the weekend implementing a plan that's both legally sound and devastatingly effective. I'm going to exercise my water rights to cut off the neighborhood's supply until Gwen makes full restitution for the damage she's caused. Using my grandfather's old excavator, I begin constructing a diversion system that will redirect the aquifer flow back to my lake, while simultaneously cutting off the underground streams that feed the subdivision's wells. It's perfectly legal under state water law, and it will give Gwen a taste of what it feels like to watch something vital die while you're powerless to stop it. The engineering challenge turns out to be exactly the kind of problem my grandfather's Navy CB training prepared him for, and the detailed notes he left in his workshop provide the perfect blueprint for my revenge. By Sunday evening, I've successfully rerouted the spring flow back to my lake while installing valve systems that allow me to control exactly how much water continues downstream to the neighborhood. The surviving fish begin to recover immediately as fresh, oxygenated water refills their habitat, but more importantly, I now have the power to turn off the water supply to 200 homes with a simple twist of a valve. Monday morning brings the first signs that my water gambit is working exactly as planned. Simon reports that neighbors are mentioning low water pressure, and by noon, people throughout the subdivision are calling plumbers to diagnose what they assume are individual household problems. The beauty of my approach is that the water reduction is gradual enough to avoid immediate panic, while being severe enough to cause serious inconvenience. Gwen's response to the water crisis reveals both her ignorance about basic infrastructure and her tendency to blame others for problems she's created herself. She calls an emergency HOA meeting for Tuesday evening to address what she characterizes as sabotage of community utilities by a disgruntled property owner. Her accusation backfires spectacularly when Marjorie Grant stands up with the water rights documentation and explains exactly why I have every legal right to control the neighborhood's water supply. The room falls silent as the implications sink in. Their HOA president has picked a fight with the one person who holds absolute power over their most basic necessity. By Wednesday morning, the water situation has escalated from inconvenience to crisis as household wells begin running dry and the subdivision's backup water system proves inadequate to meet demand. I watch from my newly refilled lake as emergency water trucks arrive to supply the neighborhood, and I feel grim satisfaction knowing that every gallon they're buying could be flowing freely if Gwen had simply left my property alone. The woman who thought she could destroy my life with explosives and environmental terrorism is about to learn that some battles should never be started because the consequences of losing are too devastating to survive. The community reaction exceeds my most optimistic expectations, as chaos erupts throughout the subdivision like a social science experiment in mob psychology, with residents lining up at emergency water distribution points while others attempt to dig deeper wells that tap into increasingly distant parts of the aquifer system. Wednesday evening, I make the decision that transforms me from victim to master of my own destiny. Standing beside the valve system I've constructed over the weekend, I place my hand on the main shutoff wheel and take a deep breath of the evening air that smells like victory and approaching storm clouds. With one decisive turn, I completely cut off the water flow to Willowbrook Heights subdivision, transforming my personal property dispute into a neighborhood-wide crisis that will force everyone to choose sides in the war Gwen started. The psychological impact is immediate and devastating. Within hours, every household in the subdivision will understand exactly how dependent they are on the generosity of the man their HOA president tried to destroy. By Thursday morning, I've erected a chain-link fence around the valve system, with multiple warning signs that make my position crystal clear. Primary water reserve, authorized personnel only, you vote Ocho, you drink rainwater. The signs are deliberately provocative, designed to force the community to confront the direct connection between their support for Gwen's leadership and their access to basic utilities. I've also installed additional security cameras to monitor the valve area, knowing that desperate people will try desperate measures once they realize I'm not bluffing about my willingness to maintain the water embargo indefinitely. The community's reaction exceeds even my most optimistic expectations as chaos erupts throughout the subdivision, with residents lining up at emergency water distribution points with empty jugs and growing panic. Simon documents the unfolding crisis with the enthusiasm of a war correspondent covering the story of a lifetime. His videos show neighbors attempting to wash their cars with swimming pool water, children being given sponge baths with bottled water, and emergency water trucks forming lines that stretch around the block. The footage is both hilarious and pathetic, capturing the complete breakdown of suburban normalcy that results when people suddenly realize how dependent they are on infrastructure they've always taken for granted. The best shots show Gwen herself, standing in line for emergency water with a plastic jug, her perfect hair wilting in the humidity as she experiences the same desperation she tried to inflict on me. At the makeshift water line behind the elementary school, tempers flared. Two dads nearly came to blows over the last case of bottled water. A mother broke down crying when her toddler asked if the toilet was broken forever. Meanwhile, the local hardware store posted a sign, "No more hose adapters, try gardening stores in the next county." That evening, someone left a cardboard sign outside the HOA clubhouse. "Thanks, Gwen, we voted for sprinklers, not suffering." The community was fracturing under the pressure, and every crack weakened Gwen's position while strengthening my leverage in this battle of wills. The political ramifications unfold exactly as I hoped, with the community splitting into factions that blame each other for the crisis, while demanding immediate solutions to problems that have no easy answers. The pro-Gwen faction, now reduced to a handful of die-hard supporters, insists that I'm holding the neighborhood hostage and should be forced to restore water service regardless of my grievances. The anti-Gwen majority, led by Marjorie Grant's growing coalition of reform-minded residents, demands Gwen's immediate resignation and full restitution for the damage she's caused to my property. The HOA board meetings become screaming matches that accomplish nothing except further polarizing an already divided community. Rick Devers, faced with the choice between loyalty to Gwen and access to indoor plumbing, makes the cowardly decision I expected by attempting to play both sides while secretly negotiating his own separate peace. He shows up at my property Thursday evening with a bottle of expensive whiskey and a prepared speech about how he was just following orders and never really supported Gwen's more extreme action. His pathetic attempt at appeasement falls flat when I remind him that I have recordings of him bragging about the bridge demolition and photographs proving his direct involvement in the planning stages. The man actually has the audacity to suggest that we let bygones be bygones, while his own neighborhood suffers from water shortages caused by his criminal conspiracy. Friday brings the first signs that my strategy is working better than I could have hoped when a delegation of homeowners arrives at my property with a formal petition demanding Gwen's immediate removal from all HOA positions. The petition, organized by Marjorie Grant and signed by over 70% of the subdivision's residents, also includes an offer to fully compensate me for all damages caused by the bridge destruction and lake contamination. Leading the delegation is a retired environmental scientist who understands exactly what Gwen's actions have cost me in terms of both financial losses and ecological damage. Her assessment of the situation is blunt and politically devastating. Ms. Lacey has turned our HOA into a criminal organization that attacks private property and destroys environmental resources. She needs to be removed immediately before she causes more damage. The delegation's visit represents a complete reversal of the community dynamics that existed just 2 weeks ago, when Gwen's propaganda campaign had successfully isolated me from my neighbors. Now those same neighbors are literally lining up to apologize for believing her lies and to offer whatever support is necessary to end the water crisis that's making their lives miserable. The transformation is particularly satisfying when longtime customers who canceled their fish orders based on Gwen's environmental scare tactics tearfully apologize and beg me to resume selling them the trout they've been buying for years. People who once crossed the street to avoid talking to me are now offering to pay double my normal prices if I'll consider restoring water service to their blocks first. But the real victory comes when I receive an unexpected phone call from the county prosecutor's office, informing me that they're opening a formal criminal investigation into the HOA's activities, based on evidence provided by concerned citizens who attended last week's dramatic board meeting. A 20-year veteran detective who specializes in white-collar crime wants to interview me about the bridge destruction and any other property crimes that might have been committed by HOA leadership. The fact that criminal charges are now possible means that Gwen's problems extend far beyond community politics into the realm of potential prison time, adding a delicious layer of legal jeopardy to her already desperate situation. Saturday morning brings the crisis to its inevitable climax when an angry mob of water-deprived residents marches to Gwen's house, demanding her immediate resignation and threatening to file a class-action lawsuit against her personally for the damages caused by her leadership. The scene, captured on multiple phones, shows Gwen barricaded inside her home while dozens of her former supporters chant demands for her removal and restoration of their water service. The woman who once commanded respect and fear from her neighbors is now hiding behind locked doors, while the community she tried to control turns against her with the fury of people who've been betrayed by their own leadership. The psychological pressure reaches a breaking point when her own water supply runs out Saturday afternoon, forcing her to join the same emergency water lines as the neighbors she's been trying to manipulate and control, and Simon captures the perfect moment when she emerges from her house with empty water jugs. Her usual designer outfit replaced by casual clothes, and her perfectly styled hair showing the effects of several days without proper washing facilities. Sunday night brings Gwen's most desperate and ultimately self-destructive gambit, when she decides that criminal trespass and vandalism are preferable to admitting defeat and facing the consequences of her actions. At 2:17 a.m., my security cameras capture her sneaking onto my property with Rick Devers and a man I don't recognize, all three carrying tools that clearly indicate their intention to forcibly restore water service to the subdivision. Watching the footage in real time from my bedroom monitor, I feel the cold satisfaction of a chess master who's anticipated his opponent's every move and positioned his pieces for checkmate. Gwen is about to make the final mistake that will transform her from community leader to convicted felon. The trio approaches my valve system with the nervous energy of amateur criminals who've watched too many heist movies and convinced themselves that breaking and entering is easier than it looks in Hollywood. Gwen directs the operation while Rick and their unnamed accomplice use bolt cutters to breach my security fence, apparently believing that desperation somehow trumps property law and that judges will sympathize with their water emergency defense. The unknown third man appears to be some kind of tradesman, possibly a plumber that Gwen hired to help with the technical aspects of illegally accessing my water control system. Every action is being recorded in high-definition video that will serve as ironclad evidence in the criminal proceedings that are about to begin. What makes their midnight invasion even more legally devastating is the audio my surveillance system captures as they work to break open the valve housing I've secured with industrial-grade locks. Gwen's voice carries clearly in the still night air as she directs her accomplices, with the arrogance of someone who still believes she's entitled to whatever she wants, regardless of law or property rights. I don't care what it takes, just get those valves open. That psychopath thinks he can hold an entire neighborhood hostage, but he's about to learn that some people don't back down from bullies. Her words provide perfect evidence of criminal intent while simultaneously demonstrating her complete inability to recognize the irony of calling me a bully while she commits felony trespassing and destruction of property. The technical incompetence of Gwen's burglary crew becomes apparent when they spend over an hour trying to figure out which valves control the water flow to the subdivision. My grandfather's engineering was designed to be tamper-resistant, with multiple redundant systems and controls that require specific knowledge to operate safely. Watching them fumble with pipe wrenches and adjustable pliers while cursing at equipment they don't understand is like watching children try to perform brain surgery with kitchen utensils. Their amateur approach to professional plumbing creates exactly the kind of mistakes that will make their criminal charges more serious while providing additional evidence of their reckless disregard for public safety. By 3:30 a.m., they've managed to partially open one of the secondary valves. sending a trickle of water toward the subdivision, while simultaneously creating a pressurization problem that threatens to damage the entire distribution system. The fact that their tampering could cause flooding or water damage to dozens of homes adds potential reckless endangerment charges to their growing list of felonies, while their continued presence on my property after breaking through multiple security barriers elevates simple trespassing to burglary and criminal mischief. Every minute they remain on my land compounds their legal problems, while providing me with more evidence for both criminal prosecution and civil lawsuit. At 4 a.m., I decide it's time to spring the trap I've been preparing since their break-in began. Using my phone, I dial 911 and report an in-progress burglary with multiple suspects attempting to sabotage critical infrastructure on my private property. The dispatcher's response is immediate and professional. County deputies are already in the area due to increased patrols related to the water emergency, and they can have units on scene within minutes. As I wait for law enforcement to arrive, I continue monitoring the surveillance feeds while mentally cataloging every crime being committed and every piece of evidence being created by Gwen's midnight desperation. The arrival of sheriff's deputies transforms the situation from criminal mischief to public spectacle, as Gwen and her accomplices find themselves trapped on my property with nowhere to run and no plausible explanation for their presence. Deputy Rodriguez, who responded to the original bridge explosion report, takes visible satisfaction in arresting the woman whose criminal conspiracy has been escalating for weeks. The irony is perfect. Gwen's attempt to secretly restore water service has resulted in her being caught red-handed, committing multiple felonies while surrounded by evidence of her previous crimes. The security camera footage provides everything law enforcement needs for airtight criminal charges that will put her away for years. Rick Deaver's reaction to being arrested is exactly what I expected from a man whose courage extends only as far as his ability to bully perceived weaklings while avoiding any real consequences for his actions. He immediately begins trying to negotiate with the deputies, offering to testify against Gwen in exchange for reduced charges while claiming he was coerced into participating in the break-in. His pathetic attempt to save himself by betraying his conspirator provides additional evidence of the criminal organization they've been operating, while demonstrating the kind of loyalty that exists among thieves and bullies. The man who bragged about bridge demolition while drinking my beer is now sobbing and begging for mercy while handcuffed in my driveway. The third member of their breaking and entering crew turns out to be a plumber from 2 counties over, who claims Gwen hired him to perform emergency repairs on a community water system. His story falls apart immediately when deputies discover that he has no licensing to work on water systems in our county and that Gwen paid him $500 in cash to fix some valves without asking too many questions. His confession provides the final piece of evidence proving that Gwen's operation was premeditated criminal conspiracy rather than spontaneous emergency response, while his out-of-county origins suggest she deliberately sought criminals who wouldn't be recognized by local law enforcement. Monday morning brings media attention that transforms our local property dispute into regional news coverage highlighting HOA corruption and property rights violations, with local television stations leading their broadcasts with footage of Gwen being arrested while trying to burglarize water infrastructure. Tuesday morning arrives with the crisp clarity of a new beginning as I stand beside my refilled lake, watching the surviving fish explore their restored habitat while emergency workers finish removing the last of the water trucks from the subdivision. The nightmare that began with an exploding bridge has transformed into a victory so complete that even my grandfather would be proud of how thoroughly I've defended our family's legacy. Gwen Lacey sits in county jail awaiting arraignment on charges that include criminal conspiracy, destruction of property, burglary, and reckless endangerment, while her criminal enterprise has been exposed to the entire community and beyond. The woman who thought she could destroy my life with explosives and intimidation is now facing years in prison, while I've emerged stronger and more respected than ever before. The criminal charges against Gwen are just the beginning of her legal troubles, as the evidence collected over the past 3 weeks has revealed a pattern of corruption and abuse that extends far beyond my property dispute. The detective's investigation has uncovered over $50,000 in embezzled HOA funds, fraudulent contractor invoices dating back to Gwen's first month in office, and a conspiracy involving multiple individuals to illegally seize private property for personal gain. The prosecutor's office is treating this as a white-collar crime case with potential racketeering implications given the organized nature of the criminal enterprise and the involvement of out-of-state accomplices. Rick Devers and the hired plumber are cooperating with authorities in hopes of reduced sentences, but their testimony is only adding more charges to Gwen's already overwhelming legal problems. The night before the meeting, I found myself in Grandpa's old workshop, running my hands over the steel compass he'd used to map out the original bridge. In the drawer, his notebook still smelled faintly of tobacco and pine oil. One page read, "Build for the fish, not the fence." He believed nature and people could coexist if the people chose humility. I smiled. Gwen never understood that, but maybe this town finally would. His wisdom had guided me through this entire ordeal, teaching me that true strength comes not from destruction, but from protecting what matters most. Wednesday brings the emergency HOA meeting that serves as both Gwen's formal removal from office and the community's collective catharsis after weeks of chaos and division. The meeting takes place in the high school auditorium rather than the community center, as over 300 residents pack the venue to witness the final act of our neighborhood drama. Marjorie Grant, now serving as interim HOA president, presents a comprehensive report on the financial fraud, property crimes, and criminal conspiracy that characterized Gwen's brief but destructive tenure. The evidence is so overwhelming that the vote to permanently ban Gwen from any HOA involvement passes with zero opposition and thunderous applause that goes on for several minutes. The meeting also serves as my opportunity to address the community about the lessons learned from our recent crisis and the importance of protecting property rights against institutional bullying. Standing at the podium where Gwen once delivered her propaganda, I explain how close they came to losing their water supply permanently and how environmental destruction affects everyone in an interconnected community. My speech focuses on the positive aspects of our experience, how neighbors came together to support justice, how transparency defeated corruption, and how one person's courage to fight back can protect everyone's rights. The standing ovation I receive feels like vindication not just for my own suffering, but for everyone who's ever been bullied by petty tyrants hiding behind official authority. The financial restitution process begins immediately as the new HOA board authorizes payment of $67,000 to cover my bridge reconstruction, fish stock replacement, and environmental restoration costs. The money comes partly from recovered embezzled funds and partly from a special assessment that the community votes to impose on themselves as acknowledgement of their collective responsibility for Gwen's action. The bridge reconstruction becomes a community project, with neighbors volunteering labor and expertise, while local businesses donate materials in a show of support that transforms the disaster into an opportunity for genuine unity. My grandfather's bridge will be rebuilt stronger and more beautiful than ever, with additional features that will serve the community for generations. Friday brings the satisfying conclusion of the criminal proceedings as Gwen Lacey appears before the judge for her arraignment hearing. Watching from the gallery, I see a woman who's been completely broken by the consequences of her own choices. Her designer clothes replaced by orange jail scrubs, her perfect hair now limp and unwashed, and her arrogant demeanor transformed into the desperate pleading of someone who finally understands that actions have consequences. The judge sets bail at $50,000 while scheduling a preliminary hearing for the following month, but Gwen's financial assets have been frozen pending investigation of her embezzlement scheme, leaving her unable to pay for her freedom. Rick Devers' hearing provides additional satisfaction as he pleads guilty to conspiracy and agrees to testify against Gwen in exchange for a sentence of community service and probation. His confession in open court provides a detailed account of how Gwen recruited him into her criminal scheme, how they planned and executed the bridge demolition, and how she gradually escalated from property destruction to outright theft of community funds. The man who once bragged about his involvement in destroying my family's legacy now sobs as he describes how Gwen manipulated his greed and ambition to turn him into a criminal accomplice. His testimony ensures that Gwen will face the maximum possible sentences while demonstrating the corrupting influence of leaders who abuse their authority. Saturday evening brings the celebration that marks the true end of our water war, as the community gathers for a lakeside barbecue and bridge reconstruction ceremony. Over 200 neighbors attend the event, including families who've never visited my property before, but now understand its importance to their own daily lives. The ceremony includes recognition for Marjorie Grant's investigative work, Simon Moore's documentation efforts, and the many residents who stood up against corruption when it would have been easier to remain silent. As the sun sets over the lake that's once again teeming with healthy fish, I realize that Gwen's attack on my property has inadvertently created something beautiful. a community that's learned to value integrity, environmental stewardship, and mutual support over blind obedience to authority. The evening concludes with my announcement that I'm establishing an environmental foundation, using the restitution money to create educational programs about water conservation, aquaculture, and sustainable environmental practices. The foundation will offer internships for local students, host community events at the lake, and serve as a resource for other property owners facing institutional bullying or environmental threats. What began as an attack on my family's legacy has become an opportunity to share that legacy with future generations, while ensuring that my grandfather's vision of harmony between human activity and natural systems continues to inspire and educate long after I'm gone. As the last guests leave and I stand alone beside the reconstructed bridge, I reflect on the journey that's brought me from victim to victor in a conflict I never wanted but was forced to fight, and I know that this story is really just beginning. The legal proceedings will continue, the community rebuilding will take years, but the most important victory has already been won in the defeat of a bully and the demonstration that ordinary people can achieve extraordinary justice when they refuse to surrender to institutional abuse.